The Cartouche by Walter de la Mare. The clatter of the mowing machine from beyond the laurel hedge had ceased. An almost complete silence had fallen, the silence of the ended. Every daisy that during the previous week had ventured to lift its eager face to the sun, every skulking or audacious dandelion had been swiftly beheaded. For lawns are lawns. They are intended to follow the even tenor of man's way, and not to indulge in the wild. The only sound that now interrupted the minute and steady click of Mrs. Millington's needle was the slightly rasping lament of a greenfinch, or the whoosh of the swallow's wing, hawking low, stealthy as destiny, through the air of approaching evening. Mrs. Millington's dark, pretty head was stooping lower than appeared to be necessary over her sewing as she sat by the dark-framed, wide-open window. The light cast up by the frilled linen pillow-case which she was mending paled the green reflected cheek and brow from the sunlit leaves of the garden beyond, and the intertwined bush of honeysuckle now languidly sweetening the sultry air. The sun would soon be setting, as it had set the evening before, and the evening before that. The sun of all her yesterdays indeed. But with how many different kinds of a dew, cloudless, ardent, of bare promise, indifferent, cold, obscure. Soon would come twilight, then deepening dusk, then night. And at night, though her heart became more restless with longing, with hope reiteratedly deferred, and with an ever-encroaching despair, her mind and her thoughts were more closely her own. Even now her eyes appeared to be intent on something a good deal further away than her needle. She had begun to think again, to feed upon memory. Then suddenly, and not for the first time in these last few months, she had realized that thought itself might conceivably become audible. As if to make sure that this was not so, she glanced up stealthily into and across the room she was sharing, her husband's book-room. Two quite different tastes, two natures and ages and upbringing were revealed in its furniture, its colors, its very ornaments. The senseless-looking clock of black marble on the mantelpiece, whose hands never failed to circle unflinchingly over its face to tell mutely what the exact time was in its own small share of normal human affairs, had been a gift to her husband from an old bachelor long-gone friend of his, a Dr. Edmund Briggs. No less clearly, the worn leather armchair in which he was now sitting, the lean, knuckly fingers of his two large hands extending to the extremities of its two stuffed arms, had not been of her choosing. It was as masculine and durable as the benches in a railway waiting-room. The embroidered cushion which, on sitting down, he had carefully placed on the floor was feminine enough. Not so the lampshade beside his chair, which was merely something to keep the light out of his eyes, nor the blotter on the leather-covered writing-table, scattered untidily with books and papers. One hankers after one's own order of comfort in advancing age, and it becomes something of a virtue, as well as a convenience, to be domesticated. The foot-flattened-out green and red Turkey carpet was also as clearly an heirloom as was the portrait of Mrs. Millington's mother-in-law on the wall, whose painted eyes, it seemed, were now inhumanly surveying them both at the same time, and with some little asperity. It was a good likeness, but not a good picture, yet good enough for her son William, whatever his age, to recall her by, and perhaps so recall her candid counsel, when, that is, he paid any attention to it. And now Mrs. Millington's exploring glance had settled on her husband again. Where had he been this last 2 days and nights? Why was he so silent? Why did the expression on his brooding face suggest more than mere weariness, sheer fag and even depression? And why wasn't he hungrily and audibly munching up his bread and butter? Was there, could there be, it had become a question recurrent as cockcrow, something wrong? Would the answer to it ever be in the affirmative? Once she had feared, and yet with the faint hope and relief, that it might be so. Now she feared this outcome no less, but with scarcely the faintest gleam of hope, with a sort of caged-in despair, rather. She pushed her silver thimble a little more firmly onto her finger and began stitching again. "Well, William," she said, the lank, wary face with its grey eyes and long nose turned slowly a fraction of an inch in her direction. "Yes, my dear," he replied. "Oh, I was only thinking." The non-committal smile that had died out over his face as he peered round at her might have been intended for a child, for, say, their small boy, Harold. But Harold, just now miles away at his prep school, was fielding rather indolently at long stop. "You are very silent, even although you have only just come back. Can't you think and talk and munch and drink your tea at the same time? It isn't, exactly the kind of absence which makes the heart grow fonder." And as she listened to the vacuous words, it seemed as though she had memorized them ages and ages ago, as if they were the echo of a voice from another existence. "I'm sorry, my dear. Tiresome, tedious company, I'm afraid," he mumbled through a half-suppressed yawn. "And yet, well, as a matter of fact, you'll never guess where I have been. I didn't know myself, so to say, until yesterday evening. I hope you weren't in the least anxious about me." She stitched on. "I try," she replied at length, "never to be anxious about anything. I was a little surprised, of course, and wondered at your not coming home as you had arranged, and at getting no message. But no, not anxious. Why?" And once more she seemed to be vacantly listening to something learned by rote. "Why shouldn't you have a night off now and again? I mean—" She stopped to bite off with her small teeth a cotton end, which she now no less deliberately removed from the tip of her red tongue. "I mean, no one could say you weren't methodical, William." "No? Oh, methodical, you mean? No." He bent forward, seized his cup, gazed at the grey-filmed brownish liquid in it, took a loud gulp, and sat back again. "Well, I was a little afraid you might be. I was dissuaded from telephoning, you see, in a sort of way, and now that you have mentioned it, I can't really see why. Anyhow, there it is." Mrs. Millington pondered on this a moment. "Perhaps," she replied, "your friend thought that if you did telephone, the wandering sheep would be dissuaded from staying. Lady, or— Don't listen to me, William. I'm being nothing but a silly parrot. I wasn't anxious. I was only the least bit surprised, and extra glad to have you safely back. But now I'm terribly inquisitive. Unless, of course, it is, well, something private." "No," was the answer. "No marks for that, my dear. There's nothing private between you and me. There never will be. Not from now. Nor was it a she, either. As a matter of fact, indeed, it was a he. You look very charming in that light. I have always enjoyed seeing anybody sitting at an open window. I can remember, years ago, my dear mother, and my poor Aunt Agnes too, she was always sitting at her open window during those last days." "Perhaps a storm is coming. It's strangely still this evening. Bless me, with that light on your face, you don't look a single day older than when— On the contrary, this last year or so you have gotten positively younger, as if you had been sipping at the fountain of perpetual youth. And I hope, my dear, you have, even although the change, I was reminded of it only last night again, would be nothing short of a calamity. The fact is, you should never have married me." He had lifted his cup again, but refrained from drinking. The click of the needle had ceased. Without moving her head, Mrs. Millington had raised her dark eyes, and was gazing out almost vacantly into the garden, as if she had forgotten, or had taken no interest in, what her husband had said. "Never married you?" she repeated. "But why not?" Because, you silly, magnanimous, heaven-sent creature, I am, in what matters most, perhaps, so stupid, habitual, matter-of-fact. You never were, and now, as tinder, I'm damper than ever." She breathed again, almost with a sigh. "Oh, William, again! I know all about that. That's a very old story. And who, pray, if it were true, is the silly? Besides, all that came back into your mind after you had been thinking. What about, and why? Last night?" She could see only one graying cheek and a few tufts of her husband's grizzled hair as he sat there lounging in his old shabby leather-covered armchair. He shifted his head round again to glance at her. "Well, you see," he began methodically, "it was like this. You will only laugh at me. At Cambridge, when I got to the railway station, there was a train at a standstill in it. There was plenty of room, and the ticket collector told me that it was a fast one. And, for a wonder, so it proved to be. But the signal happened to be against us at one of the stations about halfway up, and it stopped. This woke me. I had been dozing. It was a lovely afternoon, very, very peaceful. I put my head out of the window, and there was its name-board. Well, I thought to myself, this can't be chance. Indeed, it seemed providential. I looked at my watch, realized that I should have at least 2 hours to spare at this end, seized my bag and hat and umbrella, and got out. The train had begun to move, pretty fast by then. Someone shouted, and the station-master all but threatened to report me. It appears that if trains, even if solely for their own convenience, stop at stations which they are not intended to stop at, no passenger is entitled to get out. It suggests pure Gilbert and Sullivan, but it's positively true, and no doubt desirable. But imagine if life were like that. Never take advantage of an unexpected opportunity. Never follow an impulse. There was an oddly hollow tone, a hint even of caution, in the feminine comment that followed this not very original attack on railway bylaws. "But you may not be right. It's much more likely that it was because the train was already moving, and, as you said, pretty fast. That's dangerous at any rate, at any time, and I'm always warning Harold against it." She paused again. "What, William," she ventured at last, "was the name of the station? What, as you say, couldn't have been chance?" "Ah, there you are. You'd never guess. It was Ebbingham. And, of course, I instantly thought of Lewis. Had you realized, my dear, that we haven't seen or heard from him for months? Why, not since June, unless perhaps you did when I was in Warwickshire." Mrs. Millington glanced up swiftly, as if to make sure what her husband was looking at this moment. Her hand was trembling a little, and the color had changed in her cheek. "Ebbingham," she repeated. You really mean, William, that you were foolish enough to take such a risk, like some headlong schoolboy, and so late in the day, without even knowing whether he was at home. No wonder I was a little anxious. And then, about trains. You say you hadn't heard, but surely you remember I told you that his sister— I dislike her so much that I can't even recall her name for the moment. Oh, yes, Mildred, that I told you we had met by chance in town, and that she had said he was going away. I'm sure I told you." "Alas, my dear," said her husband, still staring at the fan-shaped piece of paper concealing his empty grate. "I don't remember. But no doubt you are right. You are too kind to this rapidly decaying memory of mine. It's getting worse and worse. I was reminded of it, too, only yesterday. Anyhow, there it is. I'd been wanting to have a word with him about the examinations next month, and he is very dilatory. But it would have involved a long letter, and I'm tired, just a little, so why not? Nothing venture, nothing win. Anyhow, I was out of the train, and in the only cab available, before I had realized he might not be at home." "Yes, was he?" "Or rather, we had quite a business talk. A good talk, too, within limits. He showed little surprise and no dismay at seeing me. or anyhow it wasn't noticeable. Rather the contrary, even. He might almost have been expecting me. He seemed very well, too, a bit absent, perhaps, but then he always appears to have two minds at work at the same time. Did you ever know a more zigzag talker? I forgot all about the trains. Tea came in. We talked on and on, long after we had finished our little business matters. And then he said something about taking pot luck. And, well, would I make a night of it? There was no way out of that, unless I preferred to face getting home in the small hours. Unfortunately, as I say, his telephone was out of order, and I couldn't very well suggest that you might be anxious. He's changed. Had you noticed that? Of course, one never could predict what he might not do next. He seems happy-go-lucky enough, and yet never somehow quite at his ease. A queer blend. I should think, in fact, he had positively practised most nexts. All impulse one minute, and the wisdom of the serpent the next. He interests me. He's thinner, but not a bit less, well, attractive, I suppose. But you would know best about that. I find it so difficult, in some things, to get the woman's point of view. There's a kind of challenging Faust-like adventurousness in his face, and I'm not perfectly sure if one can positively and finally depend upon him. One can't always be certain what he is after. I supposed for a while that he had invited me to stay on because he wanted to consult me about something, but that must have been a mistake. But there, my dear, what a disastrous thing it would be if the power were suddenly conferred on us to share one another's thoughts, without any words, I mean. Mrs. Millington had sat, her hands in her lap, motionlessly listening, her eyes still fixed on the darkening scene beyond the window, as if she were waiting for something to happen, or was in search of something within her mind, but mislaid. "I had no notion, William," she said at length, "that you that you analyzed people like that. To such an extreme, and why disastrous. I can't quite see either, if he had nothing to consult you about, why you should have fancied otherwise. As for sharing people's thoughts—" Her voice had fallen a little flat, and she failed to finish the sentence. Her husband glanced back at her again over his glasses. "Why, yes, though you may not know it, I share your thoughts sometimes," he assured her, almost with the shyness of a child confiding a secret. "But it's Louis I was thinking of. I can't really make him out. Dissect, indeed. He's so unpredictable, elusive, keeps to cover, in spite of all that gaiety, all that charm. I don't mean to suggest any definite antipathy. The truth is, my old wits are a bit too sluggish for him. Always have been. Anyhow, it wasn't really that I had in mind. As I say, we had a long talk. I'm not a bad listener, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. But for that very reason, perhaps, I drank too much of his special whiskey, so it began to languish a little towards midnight. None the less, there was again that feeling of something definite coming, and yet failing to come. As when one wants to sneeze, and can't. Actually, it was involved in the dream I was going to tell you about, in the best guest chamber too, and I pay my respects to Louis's or his housekeeper's taste in curtains and bed linen, unless he has other help. "In the guest room? There, you mean, last night?" "Yes, indeed, in the guest room. A very pleasant room, too. You don't know the house, of course. I mean its upper parts." She fixedly returned his absent stare. "We have only been there 2 or 3 times, William, to luncheon." "So it was. Twice," replied her husband, after another gulp at his cold tea, and even a bite of his thin bread and butter. "And one doesn't have luncheon in the guest room, darling, does one?" But to this little sally, and one so absurdly inviting in easy witticism, Mrs. Millington said nothing. Her sewing lay in her lap, both her hands were pressed down into it, as if it didn't matter in the least how much tumbled and creased the delicate fabric became. "The real point," continued her husband, "is not so much the dream, but something that followed it. A sort of confession, my dear. Have you time, the patience, to listen for perhaps another 10 whole minutes. There was nothing to show that she had heard the question, except that she replied in a low, ridiculously serious voice. Of course I can listen, if only, you'll go straight on. Why couldn't we have begun at the dream? Anyone would suppose. She broke off, rose from her chair, and sat down again. The clouds are gathering. Look, up and up and up. There's going to be a storm. I have a headache. But here I am. I want to hear the dream and the rest. On the other hand, William, if the thunder begins, you see, I couldn't. Certainly, the sun had left the garden, and the gloom that now lay over it in a dead and menacing quietude and stagnation was not that of an ordinary twilight. Still, presages of storm often cheat even the weather-wise in a climate so fickle as England's, and everything might blow over. Well, her husband was continuing meditatively. It was a very odd dream, odd to me at any rate, but other people's dreams are so dreadfully wearisome, and always seem so pointless. I wish indeed, my dear, you hadn't a headache. His voice had become a little plaintive. I, too, have just the rudiments of one. The same cause, thunder perhaps, but more likely Lewis's whiskey. Well, as I say, we talked until nearly midnight. He told me how one can avoid the effects of taking too much. His tongue darts about like a dragonfly, never staying for more than a moment on any single subject or object. Nor does his eye. I found it wearisome at last. Besides, whether right or wrong, I had the impression that much of it was talking for talking's sake, that he must be in some anxiety, had perhaps something on his mind, wished perhaps that I hadn't come, though there was nothing, except perhaps his manner, to suggest it, and his occasional silences. He is an oddity, you know, Margaret, so mercurial and unstable, perhaps. I wonder what you yourself really think of him. Is what I say anything like your view of him, too? Mrs. Millington was rethreading her needle, and with an obstinate cotton end, and in the failing light. Yes, she said at last, I should imagine it is much the same. Aren't all temperamental people like that? Restless and impulsive. You mean, I suppose, that he is unlikely to stay fixed in any one intention, is never sure of his own mind. Is that what you mean? But the faint voice that had put the question seemed not to be in any need of an answer. It was as if, in spite of the tense silence, she would not even be interested in any reply. What baffles me most of all, said her husband, is that he has never yet been able to fix his heart on anything. The truth is, my dear, he ought to have found a wife somehow, long ago, perfectly easy. Not that my congratulations to her would not have been tempered with misgivings. What was the dream, William? Well, as I say, I got to bed very late. A charming room, too, facing south. Otherwise, the moonlight couldn't have gotten in through the curtains. Lewis has taste enough to run an antique furnishing shop, and yet he lets his roof leak. His roof leak? I'll come to that later. As you know, I am very rarely favored with a dream, and when I am, I usually fail to remember it. Nor are hieroglyphics, he laughed softly to himself, my strong point. Anyhow, when I awoke, it was, I suppose, about 2 o'clock in the morning. Suddenly and softly wide awake, as though I had been called, as though a drowsy voice had called me. I had dreamt that I was lying face upwards on a very low bed, immured in the deep, dark, stony bowels of a pyramid, but without the least knowledge of how I had managed to get there, and convinced that there was no way out, not even by the way by which I must have come in. I was terrified and in acute distress. In the faint dusky light I could see that there was a very fine sand on the floor, and a few odd broken or derelict relics of objects which I couldn't distinguish. Sacred furnishings and images, I suppose. The place appeared to have been rifled, but there was no trace, as far as I can recall, of any sarcophagus or of any mummy, although some sort of both presumably there must once have been. Was I the mummy? The sand was of the finest dust on the stony floor, and the walls were arabesqued with inscriptions, flowers, figures, serpents, and so forth. I was only vaguely aware of this, for my attention had become fixed on one small, oblong, lozenge-shaped hieroglyphic or cartouche. As you know, a cartouche usually contains the characters of some sovereign's name. Cleopatra's has 2 birds in it, heads to the west, as indeed hers finally was. Apart from this, there was no other design that I can recall on the stone ceiling over my head. Where the light was coming from, I cannot say. In sleep, perhaps, our own eyes supply it, like a cat's. The characters in the cartouche resembled, left to right, first a crouching animal with a child's face, tiny, I surmise, of course, but greatly dream-magnified. It was also very lovely. Next, there was a tree, a willow or weeping ash, something of that kind, and next to that, and partly under it, stood what appeared to be a box or chest or tomb with a rounded top, of the shape of a sarcophagus, but much smaller. There was even a sort of sullen glitter from the precious stones with which it had been inlaid, although, as I say, this was only a representation of it. I realized that it had once contained the vital parts of some inmate, the heart, viscera, and so forth, but that now it was empty. The astonishing thing is that I knew in my dream perfectly well what all these emblems stood for and what they signified. The desperate cankering grief for one thing, the weeping willow, an inward descent towards death. It was as if the past had resolved itself into this tiny esoteric pattern, and that I could grasp it in an instant of time and interpret its every syllable as briefly. The secrets of all hearts, my dear, but that was in the dream. Mrs. Millington had been so intent on this fantastic and muddled narrative that she had hardly stirred since her husband had begun to relate it. But although a dream so comparatively commonplace could hardly be the cause of her repressed excitement, it was almost as if in entreaty or reproach that she put her next question. "William, you aren't making all this up. You aren't playing with me. It was a dream." "I am telling you everything precisely as I recall it," was his reply. "But listen, you must await the sequel. That is what is going to be my real little difficulty, and I shall feel all the better when it is over. All that was just a dream. What, when I woke, I knew, or at any rate supposed, to be the meaning of the emblems, of the complete design of the cartouche, and please don't scoff, was just this and only this. It meant it was here. It happened here. Although I hadn't the faintest conception what. It sounds ludicrous, but that was absolutely all. But although, as is the way with dreams, I took it to be a sort of personal and private message or communication, it must merely have referred, of course, to the unhappy fate, the destiny, who knows what, of the poor creature, the mummy that had been interred there, in its stony sepulchre. At least, so one may surmise. Well, so much for the dream. The aging face again turned sidelong and away from her, looking fagged and colourless and depressed, as if it were still in some degree enslaved by a mere illusion. And the eyes in it were once more fixed upon the ceiling overhead, although this appeared to be completely unintentional and innocent of any design. Once more untidy tufts of grizzled hair were showing grotesquely above the darkened leather of the chair, and the awkward contents of it resembling an old-fashioned tailor's dummy, partially dismembered. Not that the owner of them would have been concerned in the least at what he looked like. He preferred taking things as they come, and had never been in the habit of paying much attention to appearances, although his memory sometimes managed this unaided. "The fact is," he went on, "I can't bear mysteries. Things in this world should be plain and above board, as far, at any rate, as we humans can make them. And why a silly, foolish, inconsequent dream like that should leave any more impression than a child's picture book on the waking rational mind, I cannot conceive, if, that is, one's mind is ever completely rational. No doubt these psychoanalysts could make hay, and pretty sour hay at that, of the whole thing. Whether or not, I don't care, it has haunted me ever since. You see, then I knew the meaning of it. And to know all, they say, is to forgive all. But now it's gone. Besides, somehow or other, this seemed to be not merely and only a dream. For without being conscious of any transition from sleeping to waking, I presently, as I say, found myself lying on my back in Lewis's ornate and luxurious, but most comfortable four-poster, staring up at his virgin plaster. The merest trickle of moonlight was edging in between the grey-blue window curtains, causing the sort of dusky gloom that had seemed to be the illumination of my stony cell in the pyramid. Yet it cast a pale narrow shaft of light clean across the ceiling. If she had not been well past the full, this couldn't of course have happened, though I don't profess to be much of a moon expert. In fact, my dear, I claim to fall just that much short of being the most complete lunatic. There was light enough, at any rate, to show up vaguely the actual pattern of the stain on the whitewash. The stain, I mean, made by the rain that had leaked through the roof, or through the floorboards, perhaps, of the attic above me, owing to Lewis's loose tiles. To that degree, we are both of us lunatics. However that may be, there, sure enough, was the general design of the cartouche. And no doubt merely because the dreaming mind or fancy is so densely thronged with symbols which are supposed to be hints or warnings to the waking consciousness, I detected in the patterns precisely the same details as those of the dreamed-of hieroglyphics. Not only that, for some minutes together I accepted the same ridiculous interpretation. It was here. It happened here. And naturally I was pestered by exactly the same question. What? Well, all old beds, and Lewis's also, unless, which is quite possible, it is a fake, is Elizabethan. All old beds must not only have had scores of nocturnal occupants, but must have witnessed many uneasy, wakeful, miserable, and possibly even tragic nights. Peaceful, pleasant, amorous, happy, and visionary ones too. One is born, one marries, one dies, and all three usually involve a bed of some kind. From W.S.'s second best to Procrustes, they say, you know, that what are called ghosts may be merely an outcome, impressing the imagination of the living, of tragic events that have left their indelible mark on the inanimate objects around them. Why not a bed, then? Why not? He had paused again, but not as if in wait for any critical comment or appreciation, since he had at once hastened on with, I don't want, my dear, naturally enough, to destroy my own little romance. But truth must out. When the very neat parlour-maid came in with my tea and drew back the grey-blue curtains, I had a good long look at Lewis's rain-stain in the full unflattering light of morning. Naturally. And, believe it or not, there was scarcely a vestige of the pattern I had seen in it in the small hours. It was now no more than a lozenge-shaped blur, which you could, if you wished, turn either into a catafalque with morning plumes complete, or into some bower of delight out of the Faerie Queen, whichever most suited your fancy. For some minutes Mrs. Millington had been sitting, her chin cupped in her hands, her elbows on her knees, her eyes fixed on the open window, as if she were positively gloating on the intense stillness of the garden and its celestial canopy, like some molting bird too far gone to chirp or stir, and peering out of the bars of its familiar cage at the vision of unattainable freedom beyond them, or even at a freedom now become impracticable, tarnished and stale. The slightly sallow cheek no longer owed any artificial green to the reflected sunlight. The dark eyes resembled motionless pools in some mountain valley on a starless night, wherein the reflections of the preceding centuries have left nothing but opacity and eclipse. "I haven't," she said at length, "been really able to follow a good deal of that last part, William, about the ceiling and the rain-stains and the moon. After you woke up, I mean. Do you mean that what you saw in the dream was caused by a sort of distortion of the actual pattern in the ceiling? In that case, surely you must have seen it, perhaps in the few moments before you fell asleep. And yet you say that, after all, the pattern wasn't really like that at all. It was merely a blur. Besides, no mere rain-stain surely could resemble so closely a child, a tree, and a tomb. Can't it have been mere fancy, William, do you think, such as one so often, and without any such intention, recreates in one's memory?" "I am sorry, my dear, for telling it all so badly, but I do mean that the rain-stain by moonlight resembled that. My explanation, right or wrong, is pretty much what you have suggested, that I must have seen, without definitely observing, the stain on the ceiling before going to sleep, that this caused the dream, and that it was the dream that imposed the design or pattern, at least to some extent, upon it. It was merely a mixture of states of mind, the dreaming and the half-dreaming and the awakening. When then, as I say, Lewis's elegant parlour-maid tapped at my door with my tea, and, as if the word itself had actually summoned her, Mrs. Millington's own parlour-maid, at this moment, herself opened the door and came in to take the tea-things away. Mr. Millington watched her until the door was shut again. "What a marvellous crop of hair that girl has," he remarked. "You don't often see red hair nowadays, or not, at any rate, that sort of golden bronze tint. Mark my words, you won't keep her for very long. I wish, none the less, she wouldn't interrupt. But there, my dear, I mustn't bore you any longer, not for more than one more minute, anyhow, as it is for that I have been waiting. As I was saying, the moment I awoke, I turned my head to look for my dream cartouche, and the actual disfiguring rain-stain in the morning light no more resembled it than the face I am now turning towards you resembles what it was like, say, about 30 years ago, when you were a little girl with pigtails and aged 10. In those days I was not such a very bad-looking young man, although you might not think it now, and there's the rub." The vigilant and constricted expression that had steadily deepened on Mrs. Millington's face during this long and wearisome recital, after lifting a little, had intensified again. "Oh, William," she broke out, "if only you wouldn't keep straying off in what you have to tell me. What rub! I don't know what you mean. I'm dreadfully tired, dreadfully stupid, nervy, worked up. It's this heaviness in the air. Though now, it seems, the storm is not going to break after all. It's less dark. I dread thunder, am a coward in any crisis, and yet I wish almost anything. If only it would clear. Oh, everything, the air, to breathe again, one's very soul. How can you have managed to keep all this out of your talk at lunch just passes my comprehension. You merely said the trains had gone wrong. Not a word about any dream, nothing, and now you haven't even finished. What rub?" "For one reason, you precious, silly, troubled, patient thing, it was because everything I have been telling you concerns solely you and me. I sat as mum as a Grampus at breakfast that next morning, except to congratulate Lewis on making his guests so comfortable, and an unexpected guest at that. I don't imagine that he would be very patient with dreams, not at least with other people's. Not even with his own, perhaps, for very long together. He's so restless, so self-centered, so precarious. I came to the conclusion, my dear, the moment I was in my cab again, that he and I don't match. I'm sluggish oil, he's water, and unstable. Let's drop him out, and the dream too into the bargain. I believe even, as a matter of fact, that deep in your own heart you share my prejudice. However, the rub is this. Somehow that silly and meaningless cartouche took me back to when I was about 20. It was in part a memory, you see, and it was concerned in part with a tree very much like my dream tree, but not with anything in the nature of a chest or tomb, except perhaps in its general shape. My actual memory of those far-away days is of a tree, late dusk, autumn, a plain, damp, backless wooden bench, and 2 anguished people sitting on it. He rose from his chair, yawned, shuddered, and, drawing up another next to his wife's, sat down beside her and laid both his long, bony hands over hers and her sewing. "I want you," he said, "to listen very carefully to what I am going to tell you, and then to declare quite frankly if it will make the least difference to us. It cannot but alter your ideas of me, what you think of me, what you believed of me. But it's all far away, remote, boxed up in the past. It was, well, until yesterday, all but forgotten, put out of mind, I mean. There never yet was any real opportunity of its being forgiven, and it's not for me, not for myself, to forgive it now." His wife had managed to withdraw her left hand from beneath his own. The other remained a prisoner. She was breathing so rapidly that she could hardly articulate clearly. "I haven't the least notion," she said, "what you are going to tell me. Whatever it is, it could not make any difference now. It is, you say, far away, and you are young and human, like the rest of us, young and old. What are we when all is said? Like bits of elastic that can stretch so far, but no farther. Then we snap. Nor could it make any difference to what someday... Oh, William, please let me go now. My head is racking. I can hardly see out of my eyes. All you can mean is that this tree of your dreams, of your waking and of the past, and those 2 woeful young people on the wooden seat, why, both as such must have rotted away by this time. All you can mean is that men, women, all of us, just because we are human, cannot forever be fixed in anything, cannot remain absolutely steadfast and unchanged. The failure, the broken hopes, the futile yet lovely romanticalness are in our very natures, and we have, if we are foolish and impetuous, and give away the heart without counting the cost, we have to pay the price, whatever that may be or mean. You were going to tell me about some old love affair, weren't you? I can see her, sweeter, simpler, more impulsive, better natured, far, far than I have ever been, could be. And I suppose circumstances, something you weren't responsible for, something perhaps you were responsible for, came in between. Perhaps you even treated her with atrocious unkindness. Well, what then? What we want, what we desire, changes, fades out, William. We cannot help ourselves, not even when we have attained it, most of us. But the heart itself doesn't change, only its wants. And if it's that, I don't want you to tell me any more. I can see by your face, your hands are cold, that I have guessed right." She suddenly fell silent, staring at him in the faintly lightening gloom of the open window. "It's strange, isn't it? Very strange. If that hadn't happened, if you 2 had never parted, we ourselves would never have met. We should never even have met."